Hey everybody. It hasn't been too long ago since I made a video about that Gateway E-Series Slim computer. And if you guys remember, it had a power supply failure. Well, actually something burned up in the power supply. It was a Newton 180 watt power supply. And I'm sure some of you viewers were probably laughing when you saw that 180 watt power supply in a Pentium 4 system. Because normally you would expect to see at least a 250 watt power supply, 200 watt minimum supply, and something like that. But here we got a power supply that is actually rated for even less than the slim power supply that was in that slim form factor Gateway. This is another Gateway system. Also, I believe an E-Series, not really sure. Well, I like to refer to it as the dinosaur because it's so big and heavy. I've actually had this sitting in my stash of computers for probably over a year. This is an old, I believe 2 GHz Pentium 4 Williamette system. Takes DDR memory. I've actually had one before that took RAM bus memory, or more or less RD RAM. And this computer had one hard drive, had a floppy drive, well, still has a floppy drive. I just took out the 2 optical drives. They had 2 drives, a CD burner and a DVD-ROM drive, pretty typical for 2002 and 2003. And of course that P4 CPU, 512, no, actually 256 megs of RAM, running off of this power supply. Now let's go ahead and look at the spec label. This is also a Newton power supply. Okay, it's on the back. Kind of a different placement. This is a Newton power supply model NPS-160CB. So you see the 160, that kind of gives you an idea of how underpowered this thing is. Get a fair share of light here. Let's look at that spec label. Anyways, pause to view specs. Okay, anyways, like I say, this is a 160 watt power supply. It's funny, it says right here, output 160 watt minimum, which makes absolutely no sense. It says max combined power on plus 5 volt, plus 12 volt, and plus 3.3 volt output is 160 watts. Which, this kind of power output is absolutely pitiful for the computer that was in. Surprised this thing still works. But anyways, let's look at those amp outputs. Plus 5 volts is 8.5 amps. Plus 12 volt is only 8.5 amps. So equal output on the plus 5 and plus 12. Only 8.5 amps on the plus 12 volt rail. They even skimped on the 5 volt standby rail, 1.7 amps. The only rail that's even got a half decent amount of amperage is the 3.3 volt rail. So not only is this a really low end power supply, but it's not even 12 volt heavy for a Pentium 4 system. I mean, 8.5 amps. That's real pitiful. That calculates to 102 watts. And considering that the P4 CPUs, typically their TDPs were around 60 to 80 watts, the CPU alone is drawing a lot of the 12 volt output in your hard drives and stuff. I mean, you could probably only run one hard drive successfully with this kind of garbage. I mean, it's absolutely pitiful that Gateway would put this kind of power supply in their system. Newton Power is not a bad brand. I'm not saying that. Don't get me wrong. Newton Power can actually build some decent power supplies. And I've actually got a Dell branded Newton 250 watt power supply, and it's built very, very well. And I'm sure it could easily put out 250 or more watts. No problem at all. So anyways, just go and have a look inside this thing to show you how cheaply built it is. Okay, here's the inside look at this power supply. And notice, it looks very gutless. There's a lot of empty spots on the PCB. And let's go and have a look here. It does have, if you want to see, all of the required filtering components for the EMI filter, 2 X capacitors, 2 Y capacitors, and 2 coils. And we have a 4 amp bridge rectifier. Let's see what else. If I can see back in here, it does have MOVs. And rather small capacitors. I believe they're either 330 microfarads or 390 microfarads. And just have a look at those small little transformers there. Notice I got 2 primary transformers out of other power supplies sitting here. The one on the left is out of a cheap Cars IT power supply. Now it's actually rated for 400 watts, but of course we know it can't do that. And the transformer on the right is out of a Best Tech power supply, out of a probably a 250 12E. You'll find these particular transformers in Best Tech's 250 watt and 300 watt units. Notice there's actually a 300W actually stamped on this transformer. So in reality, this actual transformer is actually found in a 300 watt power supply. And just look at the size of the primary transformer in this unit. Even the one the Jeep power supply makes, this one looks small. And we got a mixture of capacitors here. We have, let's see, Nichicon, Rubicon, L-Tech, and probably something else back there. This Heinz 57 mix of capacitors on the secondary side. And then go ahead and just grab a cheap power supply board to show you a little comparison of how stripped down this thing is. Okay, here is the PCB out of an old Cars IT power supply. And right there is the case that was originally with. But anyways, this is the board, and just look at the components that are on it. Now, on the primary filtering stage, the EMI filtering stage, I added these 2 coils in myself. Those were put in myself. Originally, this thing had nothing there. And of course, it's still not finished. There's no Y capacitors. And the X capacitor was on the AC socket. But anyways, let's continue looking. And of course, the cheap power supply doesn't have a bridge rectifier or MOVs. But this power supply has bigger capacitors. These are 470 microfarads. And there is that transformer I just showed you. It's a WYEI 35C. That's the transformer size. Pretty much the same kind of transformer. And I think the heat sinks on this power supply are actually better. Well, they're about the same. But these kind of heat sinks will actually be better off in this kind of power supply, considering the fan's blowing down onto the board. And let's see. This power supply only has a single filtering coil on the secondary side. Some cheap power supplies only have a single coil. Some have a separate coil for a 3.3 volt rail. And I have removed a couple of capacitors off this board. I've harvested a few capacitors off the board. But just notice, this power supply that Gateway choose to run their computer does not have much more componentry than this one here. And I honestly believe this cheap power supply board could probably put out more wattage. You might be able to get 250 watts out of it. Unlike this, you might be able to get 250 watts out of this, but it would not last too long. It would eventually fail. I figured I'd just go ahead and share that with you. This blows the mind that companies like Gateway and Dell, in some cases, would use such low-end power supplies in their computers and then wonder why they fail a few years later. So anyways, that was a little overview of the inside of this piece of junk power supply. And I'll actually be slapping it back together and throwing it in here, because I'm going to be donating this system to Goodwill Computer Works. Because to be honest with you, I don't want this sitting on my shelf. I ain't got no use for it. So anyways, have any questions or comments, feel free to ask, and thanks for watching.